Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will begin with chapter 13, verse 45. Beginning with chapter 13, verse 45. We've been speaking for most of our sessions this week about saras, this spiritual leprosy on someone's body. But as I believe mentioned yesterday, it's not restricted to the body. In verse 45, it says, actually, I'm sorry, we are still talking about the body, got my psukim mixed up. Verse 45, the afflicted individual who has the mark upon him, his clothing should be torn, and his hair should grow long, and he should kind of have a hood hanging down to his lip. These are all considered sort of mournful practices. V'tamei yikra, and he should call out tamei. That like when he comes into an area, he should say, "I'm tamei." It's probably even worse than calling out, "I've got COVID." But the point is, this it's like this real experience, and not an easy one at that. Besides being a striking pasuk, just the wording of the pasuk jumps out at you. Right at the beginning of the verse, it says, the person with tsaras, that's what tzarua means, who has the affliction. Well, if he didn't have the affliction, he probably wouldn't be the person with tsaras. In other words, it's a pretty redundant phrase. The person with tsaras who has the mark. Well, right, that's what it means to have tsaras. Interesting kliyak around this pasuk. It's very much consistent with what we discussed before. What's taught by saying that he's the one with the mark? Pshita. It's obvious. If he didn't have the mark, he wouldn't have tsaras. Mikan raya. From here you see shetzaras shem hamakeh kimvur lamala. As we've explained, tsaras is the affliction. Parshas Betzora v'nega kinui al ha'avon. But the mark here does not refer to the mark on his body. The mark, the affliction, refers to the sin that he's committed that brings him to tsaras. Ki hachote nogeya b'chvod Hashem o b'chvod habrios. And the nega literally means a contact. So it's like a mark because it's something like a mark that's been imposed upon something. So he says the sinner has struck at the honor of God or the honor of other people. So he's the one with the nega, with the sin. So that's what we're saying. This is another way of saying it. The reason why he has tsaras is because something he did wrong. It's a medrash that says that when the person who has tsaras on his home tells the Kohen that, I've got tsaras on the wall of my home, so there's a medrash that connects that to saying that a person recognizes it's an avodah zarah in his house. Kein Amar Khan al tzarua shenilka b'tzaras al shesiper lashon hara lifgom habrios. The Kabbalah's Chazal shekola posel b'mumo posel. Nemar asher bo haneka. It's a very interesting shot here. There's a fascinating statement about human psychology that's famous in the Gemara, which is if a person points out someone else's shortcoming, it's most likely that this is their own shortcoming as well. So a person who speaks ill of other people must have some real negative things in him or herself. Because if he sees those things about other people, there's a reason he sees those things about other people. It must be that he's that way. All these things about which he criticizes his friend, they're true in him. That's why he's criticizing his friend. Rosho yefarua. His hair should grow long. L'chaper al gasus rucho. Remember, this is this triumvirate that the Kliyakert spoke about last time as well. One thing was lashon hara. The other was haughtiness. Sharatz lios l'rosha kol adam. He wanted to be his head above everyone else. Yeah, you want your head above everyone else? We're going to have your hair grow long. We're going to have your hair look markedly different and not in a better way than others. His garment should be torn. L'chaper al tsaros ha'ayin. This is an atonement for stinginess. Ki chol tsar ayin mistamagam begad of kruim umatulaim. the idea is that because he's a person of stinginess and he's not ready to share his money with others, so his own clothing becomes torn. It's not clear to me what the Kli Yakar means by this. Literally what he's saying is, wow, if you're so stingy, you probably don't take care of your own garments either. Not sure if that's really what he means, or he means something else. He might mean, if you're not going to help other people, you're going to look bad, something like that. I'm not sure which one he means. And his hood should hang down by his lip. That's an atonement for what he said wrong about people. V'tamei tamei yikra, ki hamatame b'nivsfasa v'acherim, az tamei yikra gam hu ki kvadai b'mum posel. And the reason why he has to call out about himself, I'm tamei, is because he's been saying all these other things about other people. This one's bad in this way, this one's bad in that way. So now he has to say it about himself. And it must be true about himself if he found it so in other people. So just an interesting Kli Yakar. Really is along the lines of what we discussed with him earlier in the week. Just, I think it's a powerful thing to think about. Now, when we go to verse 47, the Torah begins to talk about the laws when tsaras is found on a garment. And we'll also see later on the laws when tsaras is found on the wall of one's home. Now, however difficult it's been to wrap the mind around the discussion of tsaras on one's body, we could sort of kind of understand it, or at least relate to it, because, we know dermatologists and things like that. The idea of tsaras just developing on one's garment or on the wall of one's house is really bizarre. So let's see the Ramban. Ramban on Pasuk Mem Zayin. V'abeged ki yavo neged tsaras. Ze einenu b'teva klal. This is not at all within the realm of normal nature. V'lo hova ba'olam. And it's not something that normally happens. V'chein nigei habatim. And similarly with marks on the walls of the house. Aval b'yos Yisrael shleimim la'Hashem. When the Jewish people are fully devoted to God, Yeruach Hashem aleim tamid lahamid gufam ubigdeyam uvateyam b'marei hatov. When the Jewish people are living on an elevated level and they're really connected to God, then the Spirit of God is always upon them to make sure that their clothing and their houses are looking right. And when one of the people of this great nation that's so connected to God has some kind of sin, then there's something that looks askance in the person's body or garment or household. Laharos ki Hashem sar me'alav. And this shows that God has removed himself from him. So it's an amazing comment the Ramban is saying. The Ramban is saying that tsaras is an expression of the closeness of God to his people and the spiritual level of the generation that's experiencing tsaras. Now, obviously, based on everything we've been saying, if a person gets tsaras or a garment or a house, that's a message that something's not in order. But the point is, the point is that actually the message that something's not in order only is coming because overall God has such a meaningful connection with this nation. We certainly can relate to this. We all know people who we see left and right do things that we think are inappropriate, and we shrug our shoulders and either say, that's no surprise, or we say, not my problem. And when it's someone that we're close to and that we care about and we think highly of, though, that's the situation where hopefully we kind of galvanize the courage and we sit them down and we tell them what we think they can be doing differently. That's why, says the Ramban, when it talks about tsaras on the house, the language is God says, I placed tsaras on that house. It doesn't just say you find tsaras, because it's a clear message from God. And this tsaras only comes in the land which is the inheritance of God. Now, this idea of tsaras in the household was only once they got into Israel. It says it's pretty much implied in the pasuk because it says, when you come into the land that I give to you and you find tsaras in a house. So why? What's the connection between tsaras on the house and being in Israel? It's not because it's fundamentally connected to the land of Israel. That level of clear revelation from God, which is coming to the sinner, but it's coming nonetheless, is only going to be in a context that the divine presence is strongly among the Jewish people. That's only in the Holy Land of Israel. So it's a very ironic way to think about that. This terribly critical message is the greatest of statements about the closeness to God and His people. Daras Kohanim darshu od she'en habayis b'tamei ela achar kibush v'chiluk v'shei kol echad v'echad makir es-shalom. There's a very famous medrash that they would only have this issue of tsaras on the household after the conquering of the land of Israel by the Jews, and that everyone had their place. Then they would begin to have tsaras on the household. Vatam, the reason is because once they're settled, that's when they're ready to focus on their relationship with God. And it's when they're in the middle of a war, they're probably not so connected to God in that moment. But now that they're settled and everyone has their place, then they can merit this kind of revelation from God. The Ramban says it follows then that the marks on garments should also only be in the land of Israel. You don't have to specifically teach it's not going to be in outside of Israel, because if it doesn't happen, it didn't happen. You don't need to teach it. He says that's why actually the halach would only be considered tsaras on a garment if it was a white garment, because if it was a colored garment, it could be that the colors ran in some way and that it wasn't some miraculous thing, and therefore the halach of tsaras wouldn't apply. Okay, so I think that's a good place to stop with the Ramban, but a very interesting Ramban to think about. Let's get started on the Kli Yakar. There's a Kli Yakar over here on Pasuk Mem Zayin, also on the topic of tsaras on the household and the garment, but I see it's already 9:45, so we will begin this Kli Yakar tomorrow, God willing. We discussed the Kli Yakar regarding messages to the person with tsaras, that even the conduct that he has to exhibit are reminders for the sins that we're trying to address. And we had this very interesting Ramban talking about why tsaras was in the land of Israel and how to view that. Okay.